Okay, thank you. Buongiorno. Good morning. Thank you very much to EMA for making or putting on the event, for inviting me. I'm going to take or present from a slightly different perspective now. So I'm not a process engineer. I'm coming from an automation and a technology perspective. What I would say is that the last day and a half for me as an automation guy has been absolutely fascinating to see and to listen to the process side of things and to understand the rate and the impact that continuous manufacture is going to have to the pharmaceutical market is truly impressive. The other thing I'd say is that towards the end of the second day, I was sitting there reflecting that all of the material I've got has now been consumed, and what do I say? Which, from an automation point of view, is actually, I thought about it, is actually really good, because automation is an enabling technology, and if we're looking at and covering the requirements that you guys have already described, then we're in the right place. So it was quite alarming at first, but turned out to be the right thing. Whilst the title says control strategies, I will go into that and I'll look at it. But what I wanted to do was just touch on as well automation and control and technology from a bit of a broader perspective as well. Because one of the themes I took from yesterday was innovation. That there's a lot of innovation going on. Well, in automation and process control, there is also an awful lot of automation going on right now. Our side of the industry is changing at a massive rate of knots, as quick as I could ever remember. And I think it's important to reflect on that, and there are some values and some benefits that can be gained by pharmaceutical manufacturing from continuous manufacture. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to touch on that. So a lot of these we've spoken about for the last over the last day or so, but from an automation point of view, we need to know and understand what the trends are and respond accordingly. And if you look at this, there are things like the variety of products with a smaller market. So we're talking about modularization, we're talking about integration of OEMs, integration of data. Data, you'll see, is a recurring theme through what I talk about today. So data is everything. It's all about collecting the right data, managing the right data, visualizing the right data. Pharma 4.0, I'm not going to go through all these, by the way, is a really big thing for us in automation. And I just wanted to touch on that in a little bit more detail later. Things like personalized medicine, cell and gene therapy, moving towards traceability and absolute traceability. We looked at, and we've spoken a lot about time to market, cost-effective compliance, and how that affects what we do. And also, for me, security. So we're creating a lot of data on that. The success of our product is relying on data and the security of that data and the appropriate use of it. Why are we striving to change, to improve things? Well, based on those trends, for manufacturers and users who adopted a lot of those trends and have adopted things like world-class manufacturing, are seeing a significant improvement in what they do. Significant improvement in things like right first time, turnaround of work in progress. Manufacturing cycle times have been reduced significantly, and capacity utilization is significant. And I believe they're all contributing factors to continuous manufacture. Same with transforming manufacturing, where we look at some of the challenges that we've had in the industry around clinical approvals or loss or unavailable information. Then automation is supporting that. Outsourcing of process development, consolidating integrated data across the life cycle, modularization, again, a recurring theme, technology transfer, we've heard a lot about that over the last 2 days. Inventory and operations management. So I'll talk a little bit more around flexible manufacturing lines later, continuous processing, moving inline and outline analysis, outsourcing manufacturing and reliable operations, and then quality and compliance. Real-time release is all about how we analyze and how we use data. Release by exception. I'll show you an example of closed-loop controlling against quality critical attributes and using the data for electronic reviews. I put this in just to give you an idea of what we face from an automation perspective. All of these are pretty much, I don't know whether you've heard of or you're aware of Industry 4.0 or digitalization. That plays a large part in automation for us now and in the future. It's very broad, so no one person will stand here and say, we understand all of this and we know it all, we can do it all, and we deliver it all. But there are key contributing factors in there. So data or Pharma 4.0 around the interconnectivity of devices, around collecting data, around vertical and horizontal integration of data, around smart visualization, so how you can actually see and use data and information. These are all integral parts of Pharma 4.0. So virtual reality, digital twin, being able to replicate things in a digital environment or superimpose digital onto the physical world, on using artificial intelligence, knowledge-based systems, self-learning systems. They're all factors, they're all enabling technologies, but ultimately they're supporting some of the key drivers that our industry sees. Operational efficiency, so using data, digital workflows, around flexible manufacturing, how we can, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, around asset utilization, being able to simulate and use digital asset for scale up and quality and compliance. Just, it gives you a flavor of what we're using to support overall improvement. So why automate? Well, some of these are technologies that are available now that are making the automation or more effective, having a greater impact. So everybody sort of talks about the cloud, around making all of this data available at a higher level, and then being able to perform data analytics on it, being able to visualize. Virtualization, the power of computing now means that we can put a lot of resource in a single machine rather than having an enormous footprint. Visualization, so being able to look at and view data. It comes back to sort of the millennials of today, where they've got smart devices, they can look at whatever data they want and they need when they want it, wherever they want it. Rather than having a fixed screen somewhere in a stainless steel panel. Digital twin and augmented reality, so being able to replicate, being able to superimpose digital onto the real world. I won't go through all of them, we don't have time, but again, cybersecurity is a big, we're creating all that data, it has to be robust. So coming on to continuous manufacturing, and again, these are all points that I think I've certainly heard over the last day or so, but satisfying quality critical attributes. So quality by design for unit operations, inline measurements, effective and efficient startups, so reducing the time to start up and shut down, and that where it's applicable for process, it's exactly the same for automation. We need to have slick and refined processes and software available to support that. Material traceability, so a full genealogy of where product's coming from, where it's gone to, what's happened to it, and the data records. That's event-based, but also now time-based as well. New strategies for unit operations, so with the improvement in processing power, is being able to push intelligence down to a lower and lower level, rather than having lots of interfaces and bringing data up. And it's also been able to integrate all those islands of information. Being able to use smart analytics and simulation and predictive modeling to be able to assess the impact of deviation and change, feed forward and feed backwards. So interaction between upstream and downstream, being able to understand the impact of what potentially could happen. Being able to accommodate variability, so not just reactive control, but what's the impact before it happens. Maximizing uptime, so having visibility of not just the process performance, but diagnostics of the equipment, and managing the utilization. So one of the areas of focus we've looked at is how to make the most from each of your manufacturing facilities. So being able to cleverly and real-time schedule equipment use, facility use, people, all in the same algorithm to remove as much white space as possible. And that's real-time and dynamic. We're working on a system at the moment. So if there are any disturbances, any disruption, it automatically regenerates those schedules. So what are the benefits of automating the process? Well, firstly, being able to integrate a system, having a common platform to work on. So the same look and feel, the same sort of visualization, the same data, minimizing the training, being able to take development from a conceptual stage to commercial scale. Clearly that's a different sort of discussion when we're talking about continuous manufacture. Equipment flexibility, I'll show that in a little bit more detail, but being able to extract and remove equipment where the software has to replicate and follow that. I think a point that was made yesterday as well, and it's something that we're working on as well at the moment, is around common integration, so around standards, around how we can connect devices with the minimum risk, so taking a complete validation approach. Compliant, local and defensible position, so basing the development on standards, on known principles, on known practices, on tested and modular pieces of code. Material traceability, being able to track and record exactly what component parts made each of the batches, and having a robust system that records that, including batch reporting as well, so almost inherently and automatically generating that for you. Minimal customization, so I think Lawrence touched on it yesterday, and it's something that I'm quite keen on as well, is taking the equivalent of an S88 model, so building a modular software structure that's fixed. It becomes a library function, so when you reinstantiate that, it's the minimum amount of effort to be able to redevelop or recreate. And that's completely compliant across the whole system architecture. So now we're talking about one system across the whole of the manufacturing process. User-friendly, so a little bit softer, but it removes the risk of error, where it's the same look and feel across the whole software platform, not different platforms with different operator interfaces. It's all exactly the same. You can start the process from a common place because it's all integrated. And if need be, it can be a single place too. So all the data is available. It's a single place to review and monitor the process. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because I think we've seen this sort of picture a lot of times. But the point I'd make on here is that, and I think Frank touched on it as well, is that where you end up with almost potentially a hybrid system of batch, semi-batch, and continuous, is having the capability to take data from all of those unit operations and store it in in a common place, but it's contextualized. It has the right context so that subsequent analysis is possible across all of the different units and unit operations. And again, we've spoken about this a lot, but the simplicity of batch processing against continuous brings the processing time right down, but it's having the data available to analyze that. So we come to this point where we've now got, or been able to embed a lot of analytics in a multiple of different controller devices, but they're all complementary. So now we've got an awful lot of information, but it's all connected, it's all working together, it's all dependent. There's an awful lot more level of detail in order to understand what's going on in the process, but also in terms of advanced process control, to understand how each of these different components interact with each other. And I'll show you an example, a very simple example, by the way, in a minute. In terms of flexibility, we've seen this quite a lot, or we talked about it, but being able to create components, units, and modules, and take them out and remove them, or use them somewhere else, or be able to reinstate them. The same thing has to happen from a software point of view as from a hardware point of view. In most automation systems now, if we have a common platform, we'll have a common library. The common library equipment classes can be tested, can be validated, and therefore can be reused. It's the same with the interfaces, having common standard interfaces. So being able to remove a piece of software or a module with its inherent software with the minimum amount of rework required. Again, it comes back to the philosophy of S88, so having standard functionality and standard interfaces. So it comes back, we would talk about the plug and play standardization, and that's something that we are actively involved in at the moment, working out how best to do that from an equipment point of view and from a software point of view. There are solutions there now, but they're probably not as elegant as they're going to be as the technology develops and standards move on. And again, being able to take the data and collect it and have it in one single form or one single place, irrespective of where you've used the equipment and where the product is. So, in terms of control strategy, I just wanted to give you a simple or a very basic overview or example. So in this example, we want to be able to manage things like the optimum product, tablet hardness, blending consistency. But in order to do that, we need to understand what the critical process parameters, what the quality critical attributes are, what relationship they have to each other, and how they're actually going to be measured. So and again, we've talked about sort of modeling a lot this morning, but it's essential to have that level of information. There are challenges and complexities from an automation perspective in that there may be multiple critical process parameters, there may be multiple quality critical attributes, and they all have a complete independency on each other. But at the same time, they've got to keep the product within the design space. There's also then the added complication of process variability, and again, there are people a lot more better qualified than me to talk about or the way that the process works. But as an automation, from an automation perspective, how do we accommodate that? Continuous manufacturing, it brings a lot of benefits and advantages from an automation perspective. because we've got a much higher degree of analysis, we can detect, it's much more detectable, it's much more measurable. It allows, therefore, the greater opportunity to optimize the control and to be able to real-time manage the sort of trajectory of the product, if you like. I quite like this, this statement that the data acquisition or the data available is it is a much richer source of data and information. So data density, information per kilogram of materials, I think that's great. There's a level of adaptation, so we can use that data, we can optimize models for a much more consistent control. And in specific case, 100% of the product can be inspected and measured. So what do we need to do to make this happen? So we need to develop our prediction model. We need to be able to measure the frequency at which we're going to use our detection equipment, our analyzers, derived from the residence time distribution, so just to make sure that we capture at the right frequency, at the right rate, the right information. Data management, how do we need our system to be able to manage the models, to be able to manage the data, to be able to perform on the predictions that it's creating in the controlling devices. Has to be integrated to the overall control system, and then we need to be able to implement a control model to be able to take into account all those variances and dynamics. So, fairly simple system. Fairly basic architecture, to be perfectly honest, where a DCS will run all of the controlling software. Analyzer will be able to detect or measure the process performance, and an interface to the actual controllers of each of the devices. We need to understand what the control requirements are. So we want to be able to measure or maximize the product rate. We want to be able to control the ratio of the API, the excipient, the lubricant. It's got to be within the equipment specs, and we want to be able to meet the percentage API specification for the feeders. For the blenders, it's all around uniformity, and to be able to accommodate feeder rate variability, to be able to measure the actual product uniformity. For the tablet press, the level, the compression, and the weight of the tablets. So these are all parameters that need to be taken into account by our control system. And then, of course, all those are independent or interdependent. So a low level in the compression machine, so that it affects the turret speed affects the feed rates affect the blender speed. So it's all interdependent. The way that we look at doing this is around, if we took conventional control, so a reactive control where the output of a controller is directly proportional to the input or the error that it's measured. Very difficult to do that with interdependencies that we've just described. If you take a multivariable predictive control approach, you've now got the opportunity to take all of the related measurements, integrate the measurement outputs, and then determine what dependency they've got on each other. So it takes into account the interactions of each of the measured values. It takes into account the modeling and the prediction of what potentially is going to happen to each of those deviations. And it also gives an element of optimization. So from that model as it is now, we can run it. The model can be optimized. We need to know, for example, in this example, what the relationship is between all the measured variables or the manipulated variables and the controlled variables. Without that, we've got no multivariable control. Again, this is a very simple example. Once we know those, we can plot those in the a model predictive controller. Dynamic control matrix. So within here, we can include every single relationship and every single effect between all the relevant, or between all the process inputs and outputs. Looks very simple there, but it's quite a challenging task. So ultimately, once we've built that, we've now got our model predictive control on our system. So everything that we've described now lives in a model predictive controller, but it manages all of the other controls, all the other parameters. So the flow for the feeders and the pre and main compression forces, the fill depth, the fill weight, are all now directly linked through a model predictive controller. Using this, we can use an algorithm called linear programming, and it interprets all those rules, and it extrapolates based on the performance of the performance characteristics where the optimum operating is going to be based on the measured and controlled variable limits. It can't take you outside of the limits, of course. The system can only do what it can do. But the idea is based on those requirements, the algorithm will work out exactly where the optimum operating point is. It's normally at an intersection between at least one or two of the lines. So in this instance, we've maximized the throughput given the constraints that we've got. Great, maximizes profit, of course. But that's not always going to be fixed. So for example, it may well be that the operation is around throughput and energy, where there's a compromise of energy and throughput. There might be times, though, where you're behind on manufacturing throughput and you're prepared to forfeit or compromise some of the energy usage. So that model will change. It will allow energy usage to go up in order to increase the throughput. Okay. I just very briefly wanted to touch on, from an automation and a systems perspective, the P80 system. So essentially, the P80 system performs or provides three types of information around quality prediction, around fault detection, and then using our model predictive controller around actually controlling the process and optimization. So a lot of functionality there and a lot of information. We see things moving towards a more integrated P80 management system, where all of these requirements, again, there's a lot to read there, but we want to satisfy those, but we want to satisfy it in a completely integrated system. Why do we want to do it? Because the architecture at the moment has room for improvement. It can become better. So it's made up of quite a number of component parts. Therefore, it's made up of a number of different databases and a different number of controlling mechanisms. So for us to deploy, it makes it quite challenging. It's difficult to implement. It's fairly difficult to maintain. It potentially has two sources of the truth, or a different number of batch records. It'll have different operator interfaces. And the perception is, as we come back to sort of cyber security and things, it's less secure. And in terms of the automation levels, this is what it looks like. So from the source of data all the way through to being able to analyze the information, there are a number of interfaces and a number of places that can the data can reside. Where do we see it going? As I say, the technology is allowing it now to be a much more integrated system, so everything in one place. It's easier to use, it's easier to maintain. We standardize on models and libraries because it's all there in the same place. But it's not quite there yet. It's still work in progress, so it's still around innovation. We'd like to think, and I think it was mentioned yesterday, OPC-UA is the interface, the universal interface moving forwards, but not everybody has that right now. Potentially there's no raw data around because it's been brought in and it's been processed. And it's certainly not proven in the market just yet. But it's a vision. And it eliminates a lot of the challenges that we saw previously. So there is a single place for it to for operator interfaces. There isn't any duplicity of operation. It gets rid of any driver issues and data management issues. The other sort of point is that we've looked at how do you embed different models for different sensors. So sensors will now be integrated at the controller level, not through its own server. But again, not there yet, but this is a nice to be. This is where we would like to be. And what does it look like? As you can see, same functionality, but it's all now being pushed down into a controller level, so it becomes one piece of software. Sort of comes back to what I was saying earlier around how do we manage, so what are the challenges around using different unit operations? There's variance between all of the unit operations that we spoke about earlier. There's the challenge around coordinating unit operations. If they sit in their own entity in their own right with their own controllers, then there's a challenge around how do you synchronize those, how do you schedule those, how do you interface to them. Batch reporting, so how do you take data from each of those different devices or controllers and integrate it into one single homogeneous database? It becomes challenging around tracking and tracing around materials for consumption through a whole process. But if we start looking at a completely integrated control system, a lot of those issues start to move away, where there is a standard interface. It reduces the challenge or the issues around interfacing and gaining data, bringing it into a single place. Clear boundaries of accountability, so it becomes very clear in terms of system delivery, who's responsible for what and what standards are they going to use. There is no gap in the middle where we've worked on projects before where everybody's comfortable with their own bit, but how do you plug it all together? And as we said before, even from a batch context point of view, all of the data is now being contextualized appropriately and is being brought into a single place for data analytics subsequently. Heard an awful lot about this, so there are people who've done an awful lot of better job than me talking about residence time distribution. But what I would say is from an automation point of view, this is, again, really important, but it's really important for us to understand batch definition. Where does a batch start? Where does a batch end? Where potentially does it cross over? So then it helps us track, or for material tracking. It also helps with the frequency of analytical equipment, knowing how quickly a product is moving through a system. So one of the key attributes of controlling the process. Similar thing with validation. We've suggested a two-step approach to that, where each unit is validated in its own right, using their local multivariable control. But once that's been satisfied and that's been done, is to do a complete end-to-end validation, where we use the predictive control to understand the overall impact of retaining a steady state through the whole system. And then the vision for, certainly for the P80 system, but for automation, is once it's all completely embedded, you get the visualization of quality prediction. So we're making the information available to operators in order to help them make the right, not just our decision, but the right decision at the right time. But also fault detection. So statistically abnormal operation, they're alerted to that, but it's all in the same place on the same interface. So a bit of an overview of automation.
Thank you very much, Alan. I think we have time for a few questions. Yes.
Hi, thank you for this great overview. I wonder, did Emerson ever make an overview of the business case impact of this? So suppose that 5 years in the future, we would have a system that is fully DCS and has all the benefits that you explain. How would cost evolve in that case? Would it be more expensive but easier over time, or would the investment be lower? How would you see business cases evolve?
So that's a great question, and we challenge ourselves to that very point internally as well. And I think the answer to it is that's probably not as mature as we would like it to be. The first answer is that it needs to be a holistic system, where that's probably not quite there yet. And largely because the technology is moving at such a rate, then you'll make your blueprint for that solution, and it will evolve, it will change. I think as well, we looked at it from not from a cost perspective, but a value perspective. So it's likely that the cost of implementing a complete system would be more, but the value and the benefit it brings you would be increased. So the ROI on that will be there, but it won't be as cheap as just buying a DCS solution. But it's something that we've recognised is that we need to do that. It's also aligned to we're working on it at the moment is when we talk about automation and we talk about process and manufacturing, and it's become prevalent in the last 2 days. What does the roadmap look like as well? So there are not just Emerson, but automation generally. There are things that you can buy off the shelf now, and they will answer and they will meet the functional requirements. But process continuous manufacturing is moving at a rate of knots. So is automation. So what does the roadmap look like, and how does it align to those functional and business requirements?
If we can work together with a few industry partners and yourself to try to estimate roadmap and the cost benefit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be perfect.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. I appreciate your presentation.